Welcome to Blooming Wand, your home for grounded spiritual content. I'm Emily O'Neill, evidential psychic medium, intuitive healer, and coach. And as we approach the May 27th new moon, I've pulled a card from the Forest of Enchantment Tarot to guide our collective self-care and spiritual practices for this lunar cycle. And the energies of new beginnings that accompany each new moon, they do provide the perfect timing to connect with the transformative power revealed in this month's card, which is the Enchanter. The word Enchanter carries a rich history that enhances our understanding of this archetype. It's derived from the Old French enchanter, and that's spelled a little bit differently than the way it's spelled on the card because it's Old French, and the Latin incantare, and the term literally means to sing upon or to chant over something, from the Latin roots in, which means upon or into, and cantare, which means to sing. This etymology reveals the original magical practice where spells were cast through the power of voice, spoken words, songs, or chants. And the idea is that these things can transform reality. Now, that may seem a little bit far-fetched, but if you step back and really think about it, it's not. We all know that words hold an incredible amount of power, and that when we are intentional and impeccable with our words and speech, we can have a different impact on the world and those around us. I think we've all known people that have been careless with their speech and said things without maybe thinking it through and seen the harm that can come of that. And I feel like one of the things that we can work with this moon cycle is this idea of embodying the enchanter by being impeccable with our speech and what we say, and sort of crafting what we write, what we post online, how we interact in day-to-day life with others, and step back and think, do I really need to say this, whatever it is, or how can I say this in a way that matches my values or my intentions in this moment, which is actually something that I found to be easier said than done, particularly in my day-to-day and personal life. One of the situations where I feel myself really coming into the practice of being intentional and impeccable with my speech and my words is when I'm working with children. And in those weekly reading groups that I do at the local school, I try to be really thoughtful with how I set expectations, with how I reinforce behavior that is helpful to the group, and how I maybe call out behavior that's not intentional to the group. And because I know, especially with little ones, they notice and feel very deeply, and being impeccable with my speech around them feels really important. And it's quite a practice working with children and trying to be impeccable with your speech, especially when you're feeling just like exacerbated by them. They're wonderful, but sometimes they can be really challenging. And in those moments of challenge, sometimes it's easier to say things that you don't mean or that you would probably not say in other circumstances. So I do feel like there's a lot for us to work with in terms of this archetype, the enchanter, which in traditional tarot is the magician. So in the Forest of Enchantment tarot deck, the artist, the creator, has changed the magician to the enchanter. And I feel like this has actually really helped me understand this archetype in a deeper way. And I feel like it might be worth it to know just the completely different imagery of like a traditional Smith-Waite depiction of the magician versus the Forest of Enchantment's depiction of the magician as the enchanter. So let me just sort of describe the card to you. When looking at the enchanter, you see an elderly male figure with a long white beard, a blue cap and blue robes. There's books off to the side. There's bottles. There's natural materials. There's a wise owl in the back. Their hands are surrounding sort of swirls of magical energy that are green and blue. They've placed items in a circle to maybe cast a spell, and I think it's interesting that this is called the Enchanter, and we can't really tell if they're speaking or saying something, but you do kind of get the vibe that they may be whispering or saying a spell over this sort of magical, swirly energy that's between the two of their hands. I'll be putting this card in my newsletter. So for those of you that listen on the podcast or on YouTube, if you sign up for my newsletter, you're always going to get pictures of the cards so that you can kind of look at them, take your time with them, and journal with them, whenever you want to. Because I do feel like spending time looking at the cards and feeling into them from your perspective is worth it. Now, when we look at the traditional Smith Waite depiction of the magician slash the enchanter, it's just a totally different vibe to me. The background is all yellow. It doesn't really have very much blue in it at all, as opposed to the other card that we were just looking at. It's got red roses and white lilies. You see a somewhat androgynous figure draped in white and red, with one hand pointing upward, one hand pointing downward. We've got the infinity symbol above their head. We see all the elements of the tarot placed on this table, which, if you look really closely, appears to me anyway, to maybe not have any legs. You've got the cup, you've got the pentacle, you've got the sword, and you've got the wand all there. And you can tell that maybe they're channeling something or they're trying to bring something into being, and they're using all the tools at their disposal. And I do feel like that is something that we have in common between these two illustrations of this archetype, is there's some kind of intention to bring something into being. And so let's take a little bit of time to dive a little bit more deeply into the wisdom of the Enchanter from the Forest of Enchantment Tarot deck. Now, as I've said, the Enchanter corresponds to the magician in the traditional tarot deck, and it depicts an elder sage with flowing white hair and beard, dressed in deep blue robes that shimmer with cosmic energy. They are seated in a mystical workshop surrounded by books and potions and magical implements, and he conjures swirling elemental forces between his hands, the very essence of creation itself. An owl watches from nearby, representing the wisdom that guides his magical work, while an hourglass reminds us that manifestation, creation, all of these things occur within the boundaries of time, all things in good time. And when someone pulls the Enchanter card, the message typically centers around personal power, manifestation, and creative potential. The Enchanter represents a moment when you possess all the necessary tools, knowledge, and skills to bring your intentions into reality. It suggests you're in a position to harness your inner magic and transform your ideas into tangible results. This card often appears when you need to recognize your own capabilities and take conscious control of creating the reality that you desire. It encourages you to focus your will, blend practicality with imagination, and trust your ability to manifest. And when I use the word manifest, I'm not really speaking of it in terms of like, what is that woman who did The Secret, or like how you kind of think about manifestation in terms of New Age spirituality. I'm thinking of it more in, we have some power and influence over our day-to-day life. There's a lot of things we have no power and influence over, and how when we want to bring things into reality, one of the things we can do is be impeccable with our words. So that means, rather than saying, I'm never going to get where I want to go, saying something like, I'm working really hard every day to achieve said goal. And sort of reframing our speech to have more of that kind of growth mindset rather than leaning into limiting beliefs. And that's a way to be more at peace with your situation, to look at the journey rather than the destination. And I feel like that does help us sort of get where we want to go in a maybe smoother way. So we're not leaning into this, if I wish hard enough, something will just manifest in my life. The magician or the enchanter is saying, no, you have to intentionally kind of craft the experience that you want to have. And I think it's worth it to note that, as with anything, you can craft something or work hard at something, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get what you want when you want it. But you might get what you need. And I feel like a lot of the times we do kind of achieve what we wish to when we set our mind to something. But I always like to kind of just note that things can happen that are beyond our control, which can maybe interrupt our flow and ability to achieve our intentions and goals sometimes. But that can be part of the process. And sometimes that's actually part of the magic. So I just like to point that out whenever I use words like manifest or manifestation, because I know that it's quite a buzzword, particularly in spiritual circles. And I feel like that there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that I've seen people take it into this direction of like somehow they can control reality in ways that maybe encourage spiritual and emotional bypassing and don't take into consideration that we live in a world where a lot's going on that's beyond our control. But like I said earlier, there's a lot that we do have power and influence over. So it's this fine kind of balance. So, on that note, what does it really mean to embody the enchanter? Well, when we embody the enchanter archetype, we recognize ourselves as conscious creators with the ability to manifest our deepest intentions and desires. We become the alchemists of our own experience, capable of transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary through the focused will of our, awareness and through aligned action. And for me, that's really been a process of focusing on the simple things in life and what's right in front of me, and really loving to lean into sort of simple tasks like, I'm going to say working in the garden or drinking clean water and really having a lot of gratitude for that. Feeling the gratitude for the love of the people that I have in my life, the love of the work that I do and have the privilege of doing. And I feel like that weaves this sort of magic into my life that enhances my experience, makes me feel more fulfilled, and it does transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. And I also feel like when I'm paying attention to the words that are flowing through my mind, the way that my mind is maybe processing things, I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of times it's not framed in the most helpful way. I had an experience this week with a neighbor that made me realize that I can do all the things that I feel are the quote right thing to do, but that doesn't mean that I'll get the outcome that I want. And just a little bit of a trigger warning, this has to do with having found a cat that's elderly and injured, and I knew it had a home, and I couldn't understand why the owner would just leave their elderly and injured cat just in the middle of the road. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to work with them to get this care for this cat because that felt like the right thing to do. And I did try to be impeccable with my words, and I'll have to admit it was very difficult, and I don't know that I was. But I tried to be kind, because that's one of the intentions that I hold is to care for others, to help the suffering, and to be kind. And even though I tried to be impeccable with my words, even though I showed up with the cat trying to get it care, I don't know that they are going to take care of that cat. It was clear to me that they didn't care that the cat was outside, that they had a different view on taking care of pets than I did. And so all of that to say is we can have the best of intentions and we can do what we feel we can do in any given moment, and it's probably the best that we can do, but we don't always get the outcome that we needed or we wanted or we desired. But I'll tell you something else. I had another neighbor who is very wise, and she said to me, Emily, the cat was laying outside in the street and now it's inside the house and getting, at least it's not, out there in the elements. And now that there's been neighborhood involvement, there has been an increment of improvement in terms of the care of the cat, in that we aren't seeing it wandering around injured outside anymore. They have brought it into the house, and having us neighbors kind of come forward and offer to pay for and to help for the care of the cat, maybe help them understand that the cat does need to go to the vet. We may not get to see that story play out, but there was something that that came of that, and we may not understand or see the full outcome of that. So I do feel like that is a component of understanding the enchanter that adds a little bit of complexity to this archetype. I do feel like whenever we pull the magician or the enchanter, it's like you can manifest your desires, get aligned with your values and your intentions for your life and the time that you have here on earth. And, things could really work out for you. And I think that's totally true. But that can occur in ways that we might not expect or in ways that we might not understand. And it can include and involve things turning out differently than we expected. And how we deal with that or how we view that is really important in terms of understanding ourselves and our desire for control, I guess, is another thing I would say to that. So the enchanter within all of us understands that magic isn't about fantastical displays. It's about harnessing our creative power with wisdom and purpose to bring our visions into physical reality. And throughout history, enchanters were viewed as those who could influence reality through their knowledge of natural forces and mystical practices. The concept of enchantment has been present in various cultures throughout history. This is not a new thing. From ancient shamans and witches who cast spells to influence the world around them, to medieval European folklore featuring magical practitioners. So this is something that we find in folklore and myths and fairy tale and legends, these magicians, these enchanters. And I would also say that it's often kind of connected in some tales to the trickster archetype. So what you see happening in front of your eyes maybe isn't exactly what's going on, things like that. So there is some depth to this archetype, and I could probably spend a lot of time with it, and I probably will. And I hope that you can see that this is a wonderful archetype to work with, and that within its complexities, there's the opportunity for you to learn a lot about yourself. Now, to be an enchanter was to possess the ability to captivate and to transform and to manifest through one's words and intentions. We've covered that already. But the enchanter may also suggest a few other things. A time to begin new projects with intention and purpose, the importance of developing skill mastery, so developing your skill set, connecting with your spiritual awareness with practical action. So spiritual practices, like what we do here at Blooming Wand, turning into practical action that can evolve your experience, but maybe even help others out. Taking responsibility as the creator of your circumstances. Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying that in a way to repress or to bypass, but to say that you do have a lot of power and influence in some areas in terms of how you view things, how you want to approach things, how you want to take care of yourself, and how you want to show up in the world to some extent. And don't underestimate the power of your own awareness and how you want to wield it and how you want to use it. Now, bringing different elements in your life into harmony is another thing that could be associated with the enchanter. So that could be creating more of a work-life balance. It could be setting better boundaries with people that you need to set better boundaries with in your life, things like that. It's also, and I've already said this, being careful what you speak because your words hold a lot of power. Now, drawing this card can be a reminder that you are the magician, the enchanter of your own life, and you have the power to transform situations through focused intention, wisdom, and skillful action. So I'm just going to lean back into how my neighbor transformed my experience by pointing out that even though the kitty cat that I found in need of care didn't get the care that I wanted, it did experience some level of improvement, and her wisdom and her speaking that to me in a kind and intentional way took a little bit of the edge off of the desperation that I was feeling that the cat didn't get the care that I felt it needed to have. And so just her sharing Well, the cat's not laying in the street out in the rain anymore. It's in the house. They've put it on a warm bed that's heated. They're wiping and cleaning his body and his eyes. They're giving it tender touches and love that's much better than just being out on the street. Maybe they didn't take it to the vet like you wanted them to. Maybe they will. We don't know. But she's pointing out, like, we could look at this a different way. We can try another way. And I think that that's something that's completely connected to the archetype of the magician or the enchanter. Now, how about some practical ways to align with the enchanter's energy? What can we do to connect with this archetype in our day-to-day life? Well, we can create personal ritual spaces where you can focus your intention without distraction, even if it's just a small corner with meaningful objects. So create an altar space, or um, you can even create ritual spaces outside. I do this all the time. I collect little treasures, seeds, flowers that I've dried, pretty rocks, bones, sticks, and I lay them out under the oak tree in my yard, and I just sort of set my intentions under that tree, and kind of create a ritual space. And I do this oftentimes in the morning, around full and new moons, but frankly, whenever I feel like it. I don't need to wait for there to be a full or new moon or a solstice or an equinox to do these things. I just do it when I feel like doing it. Another way that we can align with the enchanter's energy is by practicing mindful presence in your daily activities, recognizing that your attention is a powerful, magical tool for directing energy where you want it to flow. The other thing we can do is connect with elemental energies through time in nature. So feel the earth beneath your feet, breathe deeply of the air, gaze into a fire, or immerse your hands in water. Or when you're just drinking your water, just connect with how water is life and how water flows and is required by all things, about how life itself, tiny cells were born from the water, and how much has evolved since those millions of years ago when that occurred. Pretty freaking amazing, pretty magical. The other thing you can do is keep a manifestation or intention journal to track the relationship between your intentions and how they're unfolding within in the physical world. I feel like sometimes we forget to take note of where we're at now, what we're hoping to cultivate in our life, and then we forget to kind of look back at how far we've come. And so keeping a journal, I'm always going to talk about journaling because I think it's actually one of those most magical things we can do for ourselves. You could develop a skill or craft that allows you to transform raw materials into something new, honoring the practical magic of creation. This could be through cooking, it could be through gardening, it could be through drying herbs, it could be through anything. But the idea is that you're crafting something and you're turning it from one thing into another through just kind of like simple action. The other thing you can do is use your voice intentionally to honor the original meaning of enchantment. Sing, chant, speak affirmations, or read poetry aloud. And remember that the root of enchant connects to singing spells or chanting magic over something. And I'm a huge lover of poetry. I love to share the poems and prayers that I write, and I speak them, and I do feel like, and a lot of times they make me feel seen or comforted. And I'm not just talking about the poems or prayers that I've written, but this is why I read other poets, is because I feel like they bring something really magical into the world through the way they write their words. You can study the language of symbolism to better understand how enchanters throughout history have worked with signs and symbols and correspondences to manifest their intentions. So one of the things that I have done, and this was really helpful to me, is I'll pull a tarot card for certain things. So many of you know that right around the spring equinox, I had a hysterectomy, and I pulled a tarot card, and my tarot card was the Page of Pentacles. And I thought this helped me craft my intention of moving more slowly in the physical world and starting with how can I honor my need for healing while also being engaged with the things that I love and that kind of keep me going, but doing it in a slow and nurturing way. And so I put that card on my altar space, which is right behind me, and I would look at it every day and I would say to myself, the Page of Pentacles moves slowly and with intention. Today, I intend to move slowly and with intention. And as I would speak those things, it made it more likely that I would actually do it. I'm a person that likes to move fast. I like to get things done quickly. I'm very actually analytically minded and oriented, and I'm a doer. So leaning into what I knew in my heart was what I needed, moving more slowly, creating an altar space around that, and then using symbolic items like the picture, the card of the Page of Pentacles to help me cultivate in that in my life really did help me actually do that. As I walk out of my creative space and into the house to do all the other things or into the world to engage with it, I have to look at that card and it helps me remember, Emily, don't move too quickly today. Don't lift heavy things because we're not allowed to do that after surgery. Move slowly. It's okay to move slowly. So that's one way that I've kind of used symbolism to help me honor intentions that I've set for myself. And you can see how I might come across a symbol or an image and I'll let that help me craft it, or I can set the intention just because I know that that's what I need and then place items on my altar that I feel are associated with that. Now, I wanted to talk about how the Enchanter helps us hold space for the entirety of life, like all the things that we might experience, um, which are like we get great things going on, we get terrible things going on, and everything in between. Now, how does the Enchanter relate to that? So, taking time to reflect with archetypes and tarot cards offers us a way to examine ourselves and the world around us more deeply. You know that here at Blooming One, it's a huge part of our self care and spiritual practices. And I love helping people learn to use these tools in their self-care and spiritual practices. And our spiritual practices shouldn't serve as a tool to bypass what we experience personally or what we bear witness to in the world, but rather as a way to examine it all more closely and hold space for the full spectrum of human experience. Um, there's just a lot going on in the world right now. I mean, globally, but also with people within individual folks' lives. I know that I'm holding space for a lot of people going through a lot of stuff right now. I had to hold space for myself, but also I'm looking at some things that are going on in the world that I just don't align with my values. And, how do we kind of navigate all of that? This isn't to say that sometimes we don't need to engage in self-soothing activities when we feel overwhelmed, but we don't want our spiritual practices to become a tool to bypass things that are difficult or hard. And one of the things that helped me not do that, because I have to admit, I was a yogi and had a pretty intense yoga practice within a wonderful community that included reading the spiritual texts and having Dharma discussions, and included the breath and body movements as well. But I always, and I don't know how this got into my head, but I always thought it was a way to just like go inward and be peaceful and, that whole calming energy thing. But the reality is that the world can feel like a battlefield. And in some situations, it actually is. And I don't know if it's always helpful to be just calm and gentle in those situations. Sometimes we need to channel our righteous rage, for example, so that we can move a mountain if we need to, or do something that, to save a life even. So it's just been an interesting thing for me. I see this a lot online, and I'm sure others do too, where there are just some kind of practices, especially in New Age spirituality, and especially around that word manifestation, where it's like, just bypass this and engage in wishful thinking, and you have the power and influence to kind of control outcomes and things like that. And Maybe so, maybe not. I'm not saying that that's 100% not the case, as you can tell from the discussion that we've already had, but we have to be careful about that way of thinking. When I look at what's going on in my country and across the world, I see good things, acts of kindness, and communities coming together, breakthroughs in healing and understanding, but I also see tremendous suffering, conflict, injustice, environmental destruction, and deep pain. And my spiritual practice asks me to hold space for both and everything in between. And, what the heck does this mean? And I have to tell you, sometimes I feel like I know, and other times I feel like I don't know. And I think that that's frankly just the way that it is. But I'll offer some ideas. Now, this might look like sitting with our grief, our anger, or our fear instead of trying to spiritually bypass them or emotionally bypass them, and asking what these emotions are teaching us about where our energy and attention are most needed. So, when we're consumed with an emotion, why might that be? What part of ourself is present there? What can we do with our attention in those moments to take good care of ourselves and others? Now, when we're struggling personally, the Enchanter's wisdom reminds us that transformation often begins with honest acknowledgement of what is. Like me, when I found that cat, I wanted to go crazy. I had to acknowledge that. I was like, I am fired up. I'm going to spiral out about this person not taking care of their pet and leaving it on the street when it was old and battered and wounded and injured. But I also knew that I couldn't approach the situation from that swirly, twirly energy. So, what does that mean? How did I use that passion and that anger to try to get the cat the care that it needed? And I had to acknowledge that I was in a really angry place and I wanted to say and do nasty things. And I remember looking at my neighbor and my sister and saying, I'm going to have to go get my husband to help me with this because I know that in this moment right now, I'm going to do things that I might regret later. And I had to own that. And I have to even own the fact that even though I asked for help in that moment, I didn't handle that in the best way I probably could have. And I can acknowledge that that's the way it was too. And just be like, well, that went like 80% the way that I hoped it would in terms of my behavior. And it's teaching me that maybe I can do better next time when I'm in an intense situation, and that I have some learning and growing to do around that. Now, sometimes our magic is simply just to bear witness. When we see suffering in the world, whether it's a friend going through a loss or communities facing disaster or global conflicts, we don't always need to immediately transform or fix everything. And the fact is that change comes over time, that we do have to bear witness to a certain amount of suffering and change. We can't wave a magic wand. I wish we could to make it all go away, that even to address, like I'm leaning into this cat thing, the need of the cat, I had to meet those people where they were at and trust that they would do better for the cat. And I wanted to do more, but I couldn't do more. And that's just the reality of things sometimes. And I feel like this is something that I struggle with because I want to fix it. I want to fix it now. I want things to be better now. And that's just not the way that it works. So we do have to bear witness to the time it takes for things to transform. And that can be really hard. And I think we could talk about that more. Now, sometimes the most powerful thing that we can really do is hold space and be present. Like, I see what's happening. I see how it came to this. I see my part in this. I see some things that I can do differently or can do to help. And I can see how this isn't going to change in an instant. And that's, like I said, a really hard thing to do. But I think many of us have had experiences or have an understanding of exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the Enchanter can call to us to blend spiritual awareness with physical action. And this is a really interesting thing because that's exactly what we as mediums, me and my medium friends or people who are intuitive do, is like we get spiritual awareness or impressions in our feeling and sensing selves, and then we have to bring it into meaningful action. When I'm working with a client and I'm working as a medium, it means that I'm blending my spiritual awareness with my speech. I have to be able to articulate the impressions that a spirit communicator is giving to me to the person that I'm working with in a way that they can understand it. Now, for in terms of like just day-to-day life, it means just what I was saying earlier about do the best you can with what you've got, because you know that it's the right thing to do. Your spirit is calling you to do something, and then you can take meaningful action to align with that calling. And we can do this around things that we care about, and that is a spiritual practice. It is. And this could mean an example of this could also be having difficult conversations with family members, or using your creative gifts to bring more beauty and understanding into the world. This is personally why I write poetry and write my prayers, is when I've done everything that I feel that I can do in any given moment about a situation that is hard for me to bear witness to, I put pen to paper and I write a prayer or an offering to the world about what I'm feeling. And it really helps me. It doesn't solve all my problems, but it does help, and and I share these poems and prayers with other people in the hopes that it will help them out too. And I feel like our spiritual practices become the foundation for how we show up in the world, or it can become that. And just as the enchanter works with opposing elemental forces, our spiritual practice can help us hold seemingly contradictory truths. We can feel deep gratitude while also grieving. We can work passionately for change while also accepting what is, and that change will come maybe not even in our lifetime. That we can hold space for both the profound beauty and the deep suffering that exist simultaneously in the world. The Enchanter teaches us that true spiritual power isn't about escaping reality, but about engaging with it more fully, transforming what we can, accepting what we cannot change, and finding the wisdom to know the difference. And I know that that sounds like a prayer. I'm pretty sure that's a Christian prayer. Sounds similar to that. But I think that there is some wisdom in knowing where we have power and influence and knowing where we don't, and using that to help inform our actions so that our energy is flowing where we feel it can do the most good. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. There's a lot going on here. Do take some notes. I hope you do, and journal with these ideas. Share your thoughts with me. Don't forget that you can find me at bloomingwand.com. Like and subscribe if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast streaming app. Do like and subscribe, maybe leave a comment. Same with the YouTube channel. And don't forget, if you're not signed up for my newsletter, that's the number one way I love to communicate with the community. Turns out the Blooming Wand community is people that like to read. I'm also on Substack. Again, you can connect to all of these things through bloomingwand.com. And don't forget, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.